Get away from him!
I never thought a quiet Saturday morning walk with my service dog would turn into a nightmare. The morning had started out as one of those calm, picturesque days where the air felt lighter. The sun filtered through the trees like golden silk, and the world seemed to breathe slower. I had woken early, as I often did, the lingering weight of uneasy dreams pulling me out of bed. Max, my German shepherd, had padded to my side before I even swung my legs to the floor, his eyes full of loyalty and the quiet reassurance that had gotten me through more dark nights than I could count. Max wasn't just a dog. He was my anchor. My doctor had told me years ago, after one too many battles with anxiety and nights filled with shadows that refused to fade, that a service dog might help. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to be seen as weak, or worse, pitied. But the first day Max nudged his big wet nose into my shaking hands and leaned against me when the panic swelled in my chest, I realized he wasn't just helping me breathe, he was giving me back my life. So that morning when I clipped the leash to his vest, the one with the bold words, "Service Dog," stitched across the side, I felt the familiar calm settle over me. We stepped out onto the sidewalk, Max trotting proudly at my side, his tail swaying with purpose. He didn't pull, didn't wander. He was trained to perfection, focused on me, reading every breath, every twitch of my fingers. Together, we passed the manicured lawns of the HOA community I'd moved into a year ago. The HOA, with its glossy brochures and endless promises of community living, had seemed like a good idea back then. But soon I learned what my neighbors meant when they rolled their eyes and muttered about her. There was always one person who took things too far, who seemed to thrive not on community, but on control. Around here, she had a name everyone used, in whispers or with clenched teeth, Karen. I spotted her almost immediately, as if the universe had decided my peace couldn't last long. She stood at the edge of her driveway, dressed too sharply for a Saturday morning, her hair styled like she was about to pose for a magazine cover rather than weed her garden. Her arms were folded tight across her chest, nails tapping against her sleeve as her eyes tracked me and Max. I could feel the weight of her glare before I even looked up. Max noticed too, his ears twitching, though he stayed calm, his training holding him steady. I gave him a soft pat, a silent reassurance that we'd just keep walking. I didn't want a confrontation. I never did. But sometimes trouble has a way of stepping into your path whether you welcome it or not. Her voice sliced through the morning air, sharp and shrill. "You again, with that mutt!" I stopped in my tracks, not because I wanted to, but because the sheer hostility in her tone was impossible to ignore. Max sat beside me, his big brown eyes scanning her carefully, waiting for my cue. He was calm, disciplined, but even I could feel the tension ripple through his body. "Good morning," I tried, keeping my voice even, careful. I'd learned to keep my tone low and measured when I felt the tension in my chest rising. "He's not bothering anyone." "Not bothering anyone?" she snapped, stepping forward like a storm in heels. "Your dog is always making noise, always parading around like he owns the place. This is a neighborhood, not a kennel." I blinked, baffled. Max hadn't barked once. He wasn't even panting loudly. He was simply sitting at my side, as disciplined and quiet as he always was. Neighbors who passed us often complimented his behavior, saying how he was better trained than half the kids running around. But to her, facts didn't matter. She had already built her story, and I was the villain in it. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said carefully, my fingers brushing against Max's fur. His steady warmth grounded me. "But he's a service dog. He's here to help me, and he hasn't done anything wrong." Her eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. "Service dog? Don't you dare throw that excuse at me. I know the rules. People fake those vests all the time just to drag their mangy pets everywhere." The word stung, not just because of the accusation, but because she had no idea the weight behind them. Every step I took outside was a battle against the urge to retreat, to stay locked in my house where no one could judge or attack. Max wasn't a fashion accessory. He wasn't a convenience. He was the reason I could stand there in front of her at all, keeping my voice level instead of crumbling under her glare. And then she did something I'll never forget. With a huff, she pulled something from behind her back, a spray can. At first, I thought maybe it was air freshener or bug spray, but the second she aimed it toward Max, my heart lurched. "What are you—" I started, but the words caught in my throat. She pressed down on the nozzle, and a harsh mist burst forward, sharp and chemical. Max yelped, jerking back his paws, skidding against the pavement. I dropped instantly to my knees, wrapping my arms around him as he shook, his eyes watering from the spray. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice breaking with fury. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it hurt. "What
are you doing?"
But she just stood there, smirking, as if she'd won some battle only she understood. "That'll teach your mutt not to disturb the peace," Max whimpered, burying his head against me, and I felt a rage boil in me I hadn't felt in years. Neighbors began peeking out of their windows, stepping onto porches, murmurs rising as they saw what had just happened. My hands shook as I tried to shield Max, my vision swimming with disbelief. "Are you insane?" I cried, my throat raw. "He's a service dog. You can't—" "Oh, don't give me that sob story," she snapped, cutting me off. "I don't care what patch you slap on his vest. This neighborhood has standards, and I'm not going to let some mutt ruin them." Her voice was cold, dripping with entitlement, and in that moment I realized this wasn't about Max. It was about power, about control. She wasn't attacking him because he was loud or misbehaved. He wasn't. She was attacking because she thought she could, because she believed the rules didn't apply to her. I held Max tighter, feeling his heartbeat racing against my palms, and I swallowed hard against the storm rising in me. My neighbors were no longer just watching. They were pulling out their phones, recording. The evidence was piling against her, though she didn't seem to notice or care. "You'll regret this," I whispered, though whether it was a promise or a plea, I couldn't even tell. My voice trembled, and Max whined softly, pressing into me like he always did when I needed him most. That was when I heard it, the faint wail of sirens approaching, growing louder by the second. Someone must have called them already. Relief and fear tangled inside me, battling for dominance. Karen stepped back, crossing her arms again as though she had nothing to fear, nothing to answer for. But I knew, deep down, that the moment the police arrived, her world was about to shift. "Would you like me to continue expanding the sirens arriving and the confrontation with Karen building tension before the cops actually reveal the federal crime as part of Part 1's flow? This way I can stretch it naturally to the full 2,000 words without feeling padded." "You said expend Part 2 in 2,000 words without heading," ChatGPT said. "All right, let's expand Part 2 into a full, detailed 2,000-word continuation without headings. I'll dive deep into the arrival of the cops, the confrontation with Karen, the emotions running high, and the gradual escalation toward the revelation. This section will be immersive, cinematic, and tense. Here we go." The sound of sirens grew, louder, bouncing off the neat rows of houses like a warning bell, making the whole neighborhood pause. Curtains twitched, front doors opened wider, and neighbors stepped out onto their lawns. The quiet morning had turned into a spectacle, and every pair of eyes was locked on the driveway where Karen stood smugly with her arms crossed, and where I knelt beside Max, clutching him as if I could shield him from all of it. Max had stopped coughing as much, but his eyes still watered, and his chest rose and fell too fast. My hand never left his fur, fingers moving in soothing circles, whispering words meant as much for me as for him. "It's okay, buddy. I got you. You're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Karen, on the other hand, didn't look the least bit worried. She adjusted her blouse, lifted her chin, and smoothed her hair like she was preparing for a guest she'd invited. Her lips curled into that smug little smile that made my blood boil. She actually believed she was untouchable. The patrol car rolled up with deliberate authority, tires crunching against the asphalt, the sirens cutting off abruptly. The lights still flashed, scattering red and blue reflections across the street. The car came to a stop, and a uniformed officer stepped out, tall and steady, his face unreadable as his eyes swept the scene. His hand rested near his belt, not out of aggression, but out of trained readiness. My breath hitched. I wanted to rush forward, to demand he do something, but I stayed kneeling by Max, grounding myself with his steady presence. The officer's gaze flicked from me to Max, lingering on the vest with the bold white lettering, then to Karen, who stood like a queen waiting for her loyal knight. "Morning," the officer said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "What seems to be the problem here?" Karen wasted no time. She strode forward, heels clicking against the pavement, pointing back at me with dramatic flair. "Finally! Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man has been terrorizing the neighborhood with his dog. That animal is dangerous, and I was forced to protect myself and everyone else." The officer didn't move, didn't even blink, as he listened. He gave her a polite nod, then turned his attention to me. "Sir?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "My dog is a service animal. He wasn't doing anything wrong. She—" My voice cracked with the weight of it. "She sprayed him with chemicals. Look at him. He's coughing, his eyes are burning." Max gave a soft whine, leaning his head against my knee, as if to punctuate my words. For the first time, I saw the officer's expression shift. His brow furrowed, eyes narrowing slightly as he looked down at Max. Then slowly, he looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, is that true? Did you spray this man's service dog?" Karen let out a laugh, high-pitched and dismissive like he'd just told a silly joke. "Oh, come on, don't tell me you're buying that story. Anyone can slap a vest on a mutt and call it a service dog. He's probably scamming the system. And yes, I gave the dog a little spray. Harmless. It was just to keep him in line. Someone had to." Her tone dripped with arrogance, each word sharper than the last. She stood tall, daring him to disagree. The officer's jaw tightened. He adjusted the brim of his hat, his voice lower now. "What exactly did you spray him with?" "Just some repellent I keep around," she said with a shrug, like it was no big deal. "It's nothing serious. I was doing the neighborhood a favor." Murmurs rippled through the small crowd of neighbors that had gathered. Some shook their heads, others whispered to one another. I could see phones still out, cameras recording every second. Karen's confidence didn't seem to waver, though. If anything, she seemed to relish the attention. I finally stood, though my knees trembled, Max staying glued to my side. My voice was hoarse, but it carried. "You attacked a service dog. That's not just cruel. It's against the law." Her laugh cut me off again, louder this time. "Oh, please. What law? Don't try to intimidate me with fake rules. You think I don't know what's going on here? This is an HOA community, and I am on the board. That means I have authority here, and I'm not going to let people like you lower the standards." "People like me?" I echoed, the words hitting harder than I expected. Her eyes swept over me with disdain. "You, with your so-called disabilities, hiding behind that mutt, expecting everyone to cater to you. I don't buy it, and frankly, neither should anyone else." The officer's voice cut in, sharper this time. "Ma'am, that's enough." Something in his tone made the crowd quiet. Instantly, Karen faltered for a second, but quickly found her footing again, puffing out her chest. "What? You're going to take his side? I'm telling you he's faking it. That's not a real service dog." The officer turned fully to her now, his expression firm, his stance solid. "Ma'am, under federal law, interfering with or harming a service animal is a crime. A serious one?" Her face froze. For the first time, the smirk slipped. "What?" "You heard me," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years on the force. "The Americans with Disabilities Act protects service animals. Spraying chemicals on one isn't just a violation of community rules, it's a federal offense. People go to prison for less." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The neighbors gasped, their whispers rising into stunned chatter. Cameras zoomed in closer, recording every detail of Karen's face as her smugness drained into disbelief. I felt my own breath catch. The officer's words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. For so long I'd lived quietly, enduring the sideways glances, the doubt, the constant feeling that I had to justify my existence. To hear it laid out so plainly, that what she'd done wasn't just cruel but illegal, lit something inside me I hadn't felt in years. Vindication. Karen tried to laugh again, but it came out brittle, breaking at the edges. That can't be true. You're exaggerating. You were just committing a federal crime. The officer cut her off, his voice firm and unwavering. Do you understand the severity of that? The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide if she wanted to argue or retreat. For the first time she looked small. Not the queen bee of the HOA, not the untouchable enforcer of imaginary rules. Just a woman who had finally realized she was in over her head. I tightened my grip on Max's leash, feeling his steady presence beside me. My heart still pounded, but now it wasn't just fear. It was a strange mixture of relief, justice, and a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, the tide had turned. The officer didn't look away from her. His hand rested lightly near his radio, a silent reminder that backup was only a call away. Ma'am, I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next, because right now the evidence is against you, and I can promise you the law will not be on your side. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, their sympathy shifting toward me and Max. Neighbors I barely knew before nodded in support, some even stepping closer, their expressions stern as they looked at Karen. For the first time she had no one backing her up, no authority to hide behind. And as I stood there, holding on to Max, I realized this was no longer just about me. It was about every person who had ever been dismissed, doubted, or belittled for living differently, about every service animal that had been questioned or mistreated because people didn't understand their worth, and Karen had no idea just how far this was about to go. Would you like me to carry Part 2 further into the officer's starting formal actions, like calling animal control, documenting evidence, and maybe even detaining Karen to flesh this out closer to the full 2,000 words? Or should I keep the suspense building and save the real unraveling for Part 3? You said expend Part 3 in 2,000 words without heading. ChatGPT said, all right, let's expand Part 3 into a full, rich 2,000-word conclusion without headings. I'll make it intense, cinematic, and deeply emotional, bringing everything to a satisfying end. Here we go. The silence stretched across the street, broken only by Max's faint whimper as he rested his chin on my knee. The officer's words had cracked through the morning like thunder, and now the storm that Karen had whipped up seemed to hover right above her head. Her face was pale, her arms crossed tighter, her eyes darting to the neighbors watching her unravel. For once, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA had no script to cling to. I kept my hand on Max's back, grounding myself in the steady rhythm of his breathing. Every so often he coughed, and each sound pierced me like a blade. The officer noticed too, his gaze flicking down with concern before turning back to Karen. His tone sharpened, cutting the tension like a knife. Ma'am, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not move. The command landed heavy. Karen flinched, her mouth twitching into a forced smile. Oh, come on, officer. Let's not blow this out of proportion. I didn't mean any harm. It was just a spray. He's exaggerating. Look, the dog's fine. Aren't you, boy? She actually bent a little, calling out to Max as though he might validate her. Max turned his head away, pressing closer into me. The rejection only deepened her scowl. The officer didn't waver. He unclipped a notepad from his belt and began writing, his pen scratching steadily. Name, he said firmly, looking at Karen. Her jaw dropped. Excuse me? Your full name, he repeated, eyes narrowing. And while you're at it, I'll need identification. Now. Karen hesitated, her hands twitching at her sides. She looked at the crowd, desperate for someone to back her up, but all she got were glares, folded arms, and the occasional phone raised higher to capture every second. The power she'd lorded over this neighborhood was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. With a huff, she fished a wallet from her purse and slapped an ID into the officer's waiting hand. "There, happy?" she snapped. He didn't respond. He copied down the details with measured precision before returning the card. "Thank you. Now stay where you are." He turned to me next, his expression softening slightly. "Sir, I'll need your statement. But first, I want to make sure your service animal gets care. Is there a vet nearby?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Yes, just a couple miles away. I can take him there." "You won't have to go alone," the officer said. He lifted his radio and spoke into it, his words crisp. "Dispatch, requesting animal control and an additional unit. Possible federal violation involving service animal assault." The murmurs among the neighbors rose again, the phrase "federal violation" echoing in disbelief. Karen's face drained of color entirely. "Federal?" she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "This is insane. You're making it sound like I'm some kind of criminal." The officer turned his full attention back to her, his stare unflinching. "That's because, ma'am, what you did is a crime. A federal crime. Service animals are protected under law. Assaulting one is treated almost the same as assaulting the handler. People have been prosecuted and gone to prison for less." Her lips trembled. She looked around frantically, searching for an escape route, but every eye on the street pinned her in place. The once proud enforcer of HOA rules was trapped, not by fences or gates, but by the truth closing in on her. I stood shakily, Max leaning against my leg for support. The officer gestured toward the porch steps. "Sir, why don't you sit for a moment? You look shaken." I nodded, lowering myself onto the step, Max settling beside me. My hand never left his fur, and he never took his eyes off me, as if reminding me we were in this together. Karen, however, couldn't keep quiet. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, her voice shrill. "He's scamming all of you. That's not a real service dog. I know the law too, you know. You can't just say any mutt is protected." The officer's pen stilled. He looked up at her with a patience that was razor thin. "Service dogs don't need certification papers. They don't need to be registered in some database. All that matters is that they're trained to assist their handler with specific tasks related to a disability. And based on what I see, that dog is wearing a vest clearly marked as a service animal," Karen sputtered, words dying in her throat. "Ma'am," he continued, "do you have proof this dog was threatening you?" "Well, he was looking at me funny," she stammered. The crowd erupted into laughter, the sound biting and merciless. Phones zoomed in closer, recording her humiliation from every angle. "Looking at you funny?" the officer repeated flatly, jotting something down. "That's your justification for assaulting a service dog?" Karen's cheeks flamed crimson. She stomped her foot like a child denied a toy. "You're twisting everything. This is harassment. I'm on the HOA board and I'll have your badge for this." The officer's gaze didn't waver. "Ma'am, threats against a police officer won't help your case." Before she could respond, another patrol car rolled up. A second officer stepped out, followed by an animal control van pulling to the curb. The tension in the air thickened, the scene drawing to its climax. The second officer approached me, kneeling to check Max with gentle hands. "We'll make sure he gets medical care right away," he said, his voice calm and steady. Max sniffed his hand, tail thumping faintly against the ground. For the first time all morning, I felt a flicker of relief. Animal control moved swiftly, documenting Max's condition, photographing the residue clinging to his fur. They carefully collected samples of the chemical spray Karen had wielded, sealing them into evidence bags. Every step they took seemed to drain more life from Karen's defiance. Finally, the first officer turned back to her, His notebook was closed now, his stance firmer than ever. "Ma'am, you are under investigation for violation of federal law regarding service animals. Depending on the outcome of this report, you could be facing criminal charges." Karen's eyes went wide. "Charges? Jail? You can't be serious?" The officer's voice was steady, final. "Very serious. You sprayed chemicals on a service animal performing its duties. That is not only reckless, it is illegal. And I strongly suggest you stop talking, because every word you say can and will be used in court." For the first time, Karen fell silent. Her chest heaved, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The smugness, the arrogance, the cruel laughter, all of it had evaporated, leaving only fear. I sat on the porch step, watching her unravel, and felt a weight lifting from my chest. Not all of it. Max still needed care, and I knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple. But enough to breathe easier. Enough to believe that maybe, for once, justice wasn't just a word. As animal control gently led Max toward their van for treatment, I stood to follow. My legs trembled, but my heart beat strong. The officer placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll make sure she answers for this. You focus on your dog. He needs you." I nodded, my throat tight with gratitude I couldn't put into words. Karen tried one last time, her voice desperate. "Wait, this isn't fair. You can't ruin my life over a dog." I turned then, meeting her eyes.